Welcome to LMJ English, the place where stories teach you more than just English. Today we'll take you on an unforgettable journey through the life of one of the greatest minds in history, Albert Einstein. Make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another inspiring story that boosts your English skills and motivates your heart. Early life and unusual childhood. Albert Einstein entered the world on March 14, 1879, in the quiet German town of Ulm. At first glance, he seemed like any other newborn, except for one small detail: his head was unusually large. So much so that his grandmother gasped when she saw him for the first time, and his mother wondered if he would grow up to be a normal, healthy child. His parents, Hermann and Pauline Einstein, were simple, hard-working people. Hermann ran a modest business dealing with electrical equipment, while Pauline, a gentle woman with a love for music and learning, stayed home to care for the family. Neither of them could have imagined that their little boy, who appeared so ordinary and even a bit odd, would one day become a symbol of human genius. As Albert grew, his parents became increasingly concerned. Unlike most toddlers, he didn't babble or speak early on. Days turned into months and months into years. Still, he remained silent. He was nearly 3 years old before he finally began to speak. When he did, his words came slowly and carefully, as if each one had been carefully tested in his mind before being released. His family, though relieved, remained puzzled. They gave him a nickname, der Deppert, which means the dopey one in the local dialect. Later, they softened it to the quiet one, a name that followed him through childhood. But Albert's silence wasn't a sign of weakness. Behind those thoughtful eyes, a powerful mind was waking up. While other children played and chattered, Albert preferred to sit alone, watching the world in silence. He could stare at a flower for minutes, or follow the movement of sunlight across the wall with intense concentration. It was as if he saw things differently, as if the world whispered secrets to him that others didn't notice. Everything changed when Albert was 5. He had fallen ill and was stuck at home in bed. To cheer him up, his father brought him a small gift, a simple magnetic compass. It seemed like a toy at first, but when Albert held it in his hands, he felt something magical. No matter how he turned it, the needle always pointed north. He turned it left, then right, upside down and sideways, but the needle remained steady, unwavering, always pointing in the same direction. How is this possible? He wondered. What is moving it? Why can't I see it? That tiny compass became the first great mystery of Albert's life. It awakened something inside him, a deep desire to understand the unseen. He became obsessed with the idea that there were invisible forces guiding the world, forces that could move a needle or shape the stars. Years later, he would say, "That experience left a deep and lasting impression on me." From that moment forward, Albert was never the same. The compass had done more than point north. It had pointed him toward a destiny of discovery. In that moment of quiet wonder, a genius was born. Struggles with traditional schooling. Albert's early fascination with the natural world only grew stronger as he got older. But while his mind soared with questions and curiosity, the world of school felt like a prison. At the age of 6, he was enrolled in a strict Catholic elementary school. The classrooms were cold and quiet. The teachers demanded discipline and obedience. Lessons were all about memorizing facts, reciting them perfectly, and never asking why. For most students this was normal, but for Albert it was unbearable. He wanted to understand, not just remember. He wanted to ask questions. Why is the sky blue? What makes the stars shine? But his questions were often met with frowns and scolding. His teachers thought he was defiant, even disrespectful. One teacher, frustrated with Albert's curiosity, snapped at him and said, "You are a disgrace to the class. You will never amount to anything." Those words cut deep. For a young boy who simply wanted to explore the world, being told he was a failure left scars that would never fully fade. Despite these harsh experiences, there was one subject that made Albert feel alive: mathematics. Numbers danced in his mind like music. Equations were not rules to memorize, but puzzles to solve. To Albert, math was more than just schoolwork. It was a language, the hidden language of the universe. He could spend hours solving problems, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Fortunately, he wasn't completely alone. His mother, Pauline, noticed his love for music and encouraged him to learn the violin. At first, Albert resisted. Practicing scales and playing simple melodies felt boring, but over time he discovered something magical in music, especially in the works of Mozart. When he played, he could think more clearly. Music became a kind of meditation, a way to quiet his frustrations and organize his thoughts. Another important figure in Albert's life was his Uncle Jacob. Unlike his teachers, Uncle Jacob believed in playful learning. He showed Albert that math could be exciting, like a treasure hunt where each clue led to a surprising discovery. They would sit together for hours solving puzzles and discussing ideas. Jacob would say, "Don't worry about the answer, enjoy the journey." Those moments were precious to Albert. In a world that didn't understand him, Jacob made him feel seen and valued. Even though he struggled in school, Albert never stopped learning. While other kids played games, he read books about science, about nature, about people who asked big questions and dared to find the answers. And one day, as he walked home from school, he looked up at the sky and asked himself a strange question. What would it be like to ride on a beam of light? It was the kind of question no textbook could answer. But for Albert, it became the spark of a dream that would one day change the world. Early curiosity and independent learning. At 15, while most teenagers were still figuring out who they were, Albert Einstein was already walking a very different path, one paved with questions, not answers. His life took an unexpected turn when his father's business collapsed, leaving the family financially strained and forced to move from Germany to Italy. Suddenly, the security of childhood was gone. His parents hoped Albert would finish school in Germany before joining them, but he felt trapped, alone, misunderstood, and increasingly frustrated with the lifeless education system around him. Every day in the classroom felt like a battle. The rigid teachers demanded obedience. They asked for memorized facts and punished original thinking. To Albert, it was unbearable. He once described school as a barrack, a place where creativity went to die. Letters from his parents could no longer soothe his growing discomfort. Eventually, he reached his breaking point. One day, without asking for permission, without waiting for anyone's approval, Albert made a decision that most would have called foolish. He walked away from school. No diploma, no plan. Just a burning need to think freely and live honestly. For a while it seemed like he had thrown away his future, but in reality he had just stepped into the future he was meant for. Reunited with his family in Milan, Albert didn't take a break. He took control. He began to teach himself, diving headfirst into the subjects he loved: Physics became his playground. Mathematics became his map. He read the works of great scientists like Newton, Maxwell, and Kant, not because someone told him to, but because he wanted to understand the universe as deeply as they did. He would spend hours alone, scribbling notes, solving problems, and imagining how the world worked beyond what the eye could see. That same year, Albert wrote his very first scientific paper. It was titled The Investigation of the State of Ether in Magnetic Fields. For a 16-year-old with no formal teacher, this was extraordinary. The paper wasn't polished. It didn't shake the world yet. But it revealed the boldness of his thought. He was thinking beyond schoolbooks, beyond expectations. He was reaching for something greater, something unseen. Encouraged by his progress, Albert decided to apply to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, a prestigious institution known for nurturing scientific minds. But even geniuses have setbacks. To his dismay, Albert failed the entrance exam. Not because of physics or math, he excelled in those, but because of subjects like French, literature, and history, which he had never focused on. It was a harsh disappointment, a reminder that even brilliance needs balance. But Albert didn't let failure stop him. Instead, he did what he always did when faced with a challenge. He adapted. He enrolled in a Swiss school to improve his general education and spent the next year studying with determination and grit. No teacher was pushing him. No grades were on the line. He studied because he believed knowledge was worth the effort. This period of Albert's life was quiet, solitary, and deeply important. While the world saw a dropout, a failed applicant, a boy with no diploma, Albert was becoming a thinker, a self-learner, a rebel with a purpose. He was building not only his mind but his identity, piece by piece, question by question. He would later say, "I have no special talents, I am only passionately curious." And that curiosity, born in a quiet boy holding a compass, had now become a guiding light. The world didn't know it yet, but something extraordinary was taking shape. One question, one page, one long walk away from tradition at a time. Overcoming academic challenges. By the time Albert Einstein reached the age of 17, he had finally earned his second chance. After a year of preparation, he reapplied to the Swiss Federal Polytechnic School in Zurich, this time with greater determination and a more balanced knowledge base. When the results came in, he had passed. It was a moment of quiet triumph. For Albert, it wasn't just about getting into a school. It was about proving that curiosity and hard work could open doors that once seemed locked. Zurich welcomed him with a breath of fresh academic air. The Polytechnic was different from the strict old-fashioned schools he had known. Here, students were encouraged to think independently and explore ideas. Albert finally felt like he was in the right place. But even in this modern environment, his journey was far from easy. Albert's rebellious spirit didn't vanish when he stepped into college. He still questioned everything. He skipped classes that didn't interest him and often taught himself. Instead of following the formal curriculum, he preferred thinking in solitude over sitting in crowded lecture halls. This frustrated many of his professors, who saw him as disrespectful and undisciplined. One of them even told him, "You are a clever boy, Einstein, but you lack respect for authority." But Albert wasn't trying to disrespect anyone, he just had a different rhythm. While others memorized formulas, he asked, "Why does this work? What lies underneath?" He wasn't satisfied with surface-level answers. His mind wandered beyond the textbooks, into the mysteries of time, light, and space. During this period, Albert met someone who would become more than just a classmate. Mileva Maric, the only woman in the physics program. She was brilliant, determined, and just as curious as he was. In a time when women were often excluded from science, Mileva stood her ground. The two of them quickly formed a deep intellectual bond. They stayed up late discussing theories, scribbling notes in the margins of books, challenging each other's ideas. Albert was drawn to Mileva's intelligence and she to his passion. Their friendship grew into love, but it wasn't a fairy tale. Their relationship faced constant challenges, criticism from others, financial difficulties, and the weight of ambition pressing down on both of them. Still, they found comfort in each other's dreams. Albert once wrote to her, "Together we will conquer the world of science." Despite his talent and his growing confidence, Albert's academic journey remained rocky. When he graduated in 1900 with a degree in physics, he hoped to step into a career as a professor or researcher. But the letters of recommendation from his professors were lukewarm at best. They didn't appreciate his independent thinking. They didn't see the spark in him. So while his classmates moved into teaching roles, Albert faced rejection after rejection. It was a bitter moment. He had worked so hard, overcome so much, and yet the world still didn't open its doors. But Albert didn't crumble. He didn't blame or complain. He simply moved forward. He took whatever small jobs he could find, tutoring, teaching part-time, and kept looking for opportunities. In 1902, after endless searching, he finally landed a job at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. It wasn't a university. It wasn't a laboratory. It was a government job reviewing patent applications, a far cry from his dream. At first, it felt like a defeat. But Albert soon realized that this unexpected path came with a gift: time. Time to think, time to write, time to work on the questions that had followed him since childhood. The world may not have seen a genius yet, but inside that quiet office, between stacks of paperwork and long hours, something extraordinary was taking shape. Difficult early career. Working at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern was far from the dream Albert Einstein had once imagined. The job was repetitive. Every day, he sat at a small desk, reading applications for new inventions and deciding if they were original or useful. It wasn't science, it wasn't discovery, it was paperwork. But while others may have felt trapped, Albert saw something different. In that quiet office, surrounded by technical drawings and legal documents, he found a strange kind of freedom. There were no lectures to attend, no professors to please, no rules telling him what to think. And so, while he completed his duties carefully and without complaint, Albert secretly used his free time to explore the mysteries that had always fascinated him: light, time, energy, motion. He called the patent office his worldly cloister, a kind of personal monastery where his greatest ideas could quietly take shape. At home, life was both joyful and difficult. In 1903, Albert married Mileva Maric, his classmate and scientific partner. Their love had survived years of long letters, shared dreams, and mutual struggles. They had a simple wedding with little money and few guests, but they had something rare: belief in each other. Soon after, they welcomed their first son, Hans Albert, into the world. But with a growing family came new pressures. Albert's salary as a patent clerk was modest, barely enough to pay rent and buy food. Their apartment was small and often cold. Every franc was stretched. Mileva, who had once dreamed of her own career in science, gave up her ambitions to care for their child and support Albert. Friends and even family told Albert to forget his scientific pursuits, to focus on his job and be practical. But Albert refused. "I would rather struggle for my passion," he said, "than live comfortably without purpose." And so, night after a full day at work and time with his family, Albert would sit at his desk with a pencil, a notebook, and a universe full of questions. He was working in the shadows, unnoticed by the academic world, without a title or a laboratory, but he was building something that would soon shake the foundations of physics itself. The year was 1905. Albert was 26 years old. In a single, miraculous year, what scientists now call his annus mirabilis, or miracle year, he published 4 groundbreaking papers that would forever change how humanity understands the universe. The photoelectric effect. He showed that light could behave like tiny particles called photons, challenging the traditional wave theory of light. This idea would later win him the Nobel Prize. Brownian motion. He mathematically proved that atoms and molecules exist by explaining the random movement of particles in liquid, confirming a major theory that had long lacked evidence. Special theory of relativity. He introduced the astonishing idea that time and space are not fixed but relative, depending on the observer's motion. It was revolutionary. Tondi, MC2. In just 5 characters, Albert expressed one of the most powerful truths in physics. Energy and mass are interchangeable. This tiny equation held the key to understanding stars, the atom, and even the future of energy on Earth. No one expected this. A lowly patent clerk with no academic position and no reputation had just rewritten the laws of physics. Word spread quickly. Scientists were stunned. His papers were read, discussed, debated, and eventually celebrated. Albert Einstein, once dismissed by teachers, once rejected by universities, was now the voice of a new era in science, and yet he remained humble. He still wore old clothes, still walked to work, still played the violin at night. But now his thoughts were lighting up minds around the world. His patience, persistence, and quiet belief in the power of ideas had turned a modest life into a moment of genius. Breakthrough in 1905, the miracle year. The year 1905 didn't begin with fireworks or fanfare. In fact, for most people, it was just another ordinary year. But for Albert Einstein, it would become the year that changed everything, not only for him, but for science and for the entire world. That year, while still working full-time as a patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, Albert submitted 4 scientific papers to the Annalen der Physik, a respected physics journal. Each one, on its own, would have made a scientist's career. Together, they created a revolution. The first paper explained the photoelectric effect, suggesting that light, once thought to behave only like a wave, could also act like a stream of particles, photons. This idea was bold. It challenged the very foundations of classical physics. At the time, no one had a clear explanation for why light could knock electrons off metal surfaces. Einstein's theory gave that explanation, though it would take years. For the world to fully grasp its importance, this paper would later earn him the Nobel Prize in Physics. The second paper solved a puzzle that had troubled scientists for decades: Brownian motion. Why did tiny particles, when placed in liquid, seem to dance and move without reason? Einstein showed that this jittery movement was caused by invisible molecules bumping into the particles, solid proof that atoms and molecules existed at a time when many still doubted their reality. Then came the third paper, perhaps the most famous of all. In his special theory of relativity, Einstein introduced a concept so daring it shook the very core of human understanding. Time and space are not absolute. Instead, they depend on the speed of the observer. Two people moving at different speeds could actually experience time differently. The faster you go, the slower time moves for you. It was a breathtaking idea, one that no scientist had dared to suggest before. But Einstein wasn't finished. In his fourth paper, as a short follow-up to relativity, he delivered a single, elegant equation that would echo through the ages. MC2. This simple formula revealed that energy and mass are interchangeable. A small amount of mass could be converted into a massive amount of energy. The implications were cosmic. It explained how stars shine, and decades later how atomic bombs could release such devastating power. These papers didn't just add to the field of physics, they redefined it. For centuries, Newtonian physics had been the guiding light of science. Einstein's work didn't destroy that foundation, but it built something new on top of it, something deeper, stranger, and more beautiful. When word of his work spread, physicists around Europe began to take notice. "Who is this Einstein?" they asked. He had no university position, no laboratory, no team, just a desk, a pencil, and a mind that refused to stop asking why. His theories were not based on experiments but on thought, what he called Gedankenexperimente, or thought experiments. He imagined riding on a beam of light. He imagined clocks on moving trains, and through imagination he reshaped science. Despite the worldwide excitement building around his name, Albert remained grounded. He didn't seek fame. He didn't buy expensive clothes or move to a fancy house. He still walked through the streets of Bern like an ordinary man, smiling at strangers, thinking quietly about stars and atoms. What mattered to him wasn't recognition, it was understanding. For the world, 1905 was a miracle year. For Albert Einstein, it was the reward of years of quiet struggle, deep thought, and relentless curiosity. The boy who once sat alone staring at a compass had now become the man who would change the way we see the universe forever. Rising fame and challenges. By 1909, Albert Einstein's once quiet name had become known throughout Europe. Scientists, universities, and even newspapers were talking about the young patent clerk whose ideas had turned the world of physics upside down. His revolutionary papers from 1905 were no longer just theories. They were gaining support, evidence, and admiration. Einstein had become more than a thinker. He was becoming a symbol of a new scientific era. Universities that had once ignored him were now inviting him to teach. That year, he finally left the Swiss Patent Office and became a professor at the University of Zurich. Just 4 years earlier, he had been struggling to find any job at all. Now institutions competed for his attention. Later, he would move to Prague, where he continued his research and deepened his thinking on gravity and motion. Though his professional life was soaring, Einstein remained remarkably grounded. He still lived simply, wearing the same old clothes, walking everywhere, and refusing to be dazzled by praise. When asked if he considered himself a genius, he once replied humbly, "I am no genius, I am simply curious. I stay with questions longer than others." But with fame came new challenges. For the first time in his life, Albert was under constant public pressure. Scientists wanted him to lecture, journalists wanted interviews, and universities expected him to guide students and produce results. While he appreciated the respect, Einstein felt torn. He didn't crave attention, he craved time to think. At the same time, Europe was undergoing massive political changes. World War I broke out in 1914, shaking the continent and dividing nations. Many German scientists supported the war, signing public declarations of loyalty. But Einstein refused. He spoke out against war, calling it a tragedy of human pride and violence. His message was clear. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of understanding. This unpopular opinion made him enemies. He was criticized, misunderstood, and even labeled unpatriotic. But he stood firm. He believed that scientists had a responsibility not only to discover the truth, but to protect life. Nationalism is an infantile disease, he once said. It is the measles of mankind. Amid these political storms, his marriage to Mileva began to collapse. The years of financial stress, emotional distance, and the burden of fame had taken their toll. Mileva, once his intellectual partner, felt left behind. They argued often. In 1919, after years of trying to make it work, they officially divorced. Albert ensured that Mileva and their 2 sons were financially supported, but the pain lingered. That same year, as his personal life unraveled, something extraordinary happened. British astronomers tested his general theory of relativity, a concept Einstein had been developing since 1915. During a solar eclipse, they confirmed his prediction that gravity could bend light. This discovery shocked the world. Newspapers printed headlines like, "Einstein's theory proven," and "New light on the universe." Overnight, Einstein became a global celebrity. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a symbol of genius. Crowds gathered to hear him speak. His image appeared in magazines and newspapers. Children learned his name. But fame didn't bring peace. It brought noise, distraction, and more misunderstanding. As a Jewish scientist in a Europe filled with growing anti-Semitism, he felt both admired and alienated. When asked how he felt about being famous, he replied with quiet sarcasm, "If my theories are proven right, the Germans will say I am a German, and the Americans will say I am a Jew. If they are proven wrong, the Germans will say I am a Jew, and the Americans will say I am a German." Behind the headlines and honors, Einstein remained the same man, thoughtful, curious, and deeply human. He never let his growing fame distract him from what truly mattered: the search for truth, the fight for peace, and the belief that science should serve humanity, global influence and activism. As the 1920s unfolded, Albert Einstein's fame reached every corner of the world. He was no longer just a scientist known in academic circles. He had become a household name, a symbol of brilliance, and a living legend. But instead of hiding from the spotlight, Einstein chose to use it for something greater than personal glory. He began to travel the world, not only to share his scientific ideas, but also to build bridges between people, cultures, and nations. He visited the United States, where students packed lecture halls just to hear him speak. He traveled to Japan, where crowds lined the streets and children greeted him with songs. In every country he visited, Einstein brought not just equations and theories, but stories of peace, compassion, and understanding. He believed that science should unite people, not divide them. And with the horrors of World War I still fresh in his memory, Einstein became a powerful voice against war. He warned of the dangers of nationalism and militarism. "Peace cannot be kept by force," he said again and again. "It can only be achieved by understanding." These were not just words to Einstein, they were a mission. Einstein also became an advocate for those who had no voice. He spoke up for minorities, refugees, and the oppressed, using his fame to challenge injustice. At a time when anti-Semitism and racism were spreading across Europe, Einstein stood firm in his identity and his beliefs. He was proud of his Jewish heritage and deeply concerned about the growing hatred he saw in his homeland. But not everyone admired him. As his fame grew, so did the number of critics. Some accused him of being too idealistic. Others tried to discredit his work. Newspapers that once praised him began to publish cartoons mocking his ideas. Political extremists called his theories un-German and dangerous. In Germany, a rising tide of hatred was beginning to turn against him. Einstein didn't back down. He responded not with anger, but with wisdom. "Great spirits," he once said, "have always encountered violent opposition from mediocre minds." He knew that speaking the truth often came at a cost, but he was willing to pay it. Even as the pressure mounted, Einstein continued to push the boundaries of science. He worked tirelessly to expand his theories, searching for a unified field. Theory, a single explanation that could tie all the forces of nature together. It was a difficult quest, filled with frustration and failure, but Einstein never stopped trying. His mind was never content with what was already known. It always reached for what was possible. Back at home, his personal life remained complicated. He remarried in 1919, this time to his cousin Elsa, who provided him with some stability and care. But Albert's heart was always divided between his love for discovery and his concern for humanity, between the beauty of science and the pain of the world. By the end of the 1920s, Einstein had become much more than a physicist. He had become a global citizen, a philosopher, and a humanist. His voice was respected not only in laboratories but in parliaments, classrooms, and even homes. He had turned his intellect into a light, not just to understand the stars but to guide people through the darkness of conflict and fear. But the world was changing again, and soon Einstein would face one of the most painful choices of his life. Fleeing Nazi. Germany and life in the US. By the early 1930s, the world was shifting in terrifying ways. In Germany, Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were rising to power. Their message was loud and hateful, filled with racism, anti-Semitism, and a deep rejection of intellectual freedom. For Albert Einstein, a Jewish scientist who spoke openly about peace, justice, and human dignity, the danger became very real very quickly. Einstein had been living and working in Berlin, holding one of the most prestigious academic positions in Europe. But as Nazi ideology spread, the atmosphere grew dark. Books were burned, including his. Public attacks labeled his work as Jewish science, an insult meant to discredit everything he had achieved. There were threats to his life. Friends warned him to leave before it was too late. Einstein made a difficult decision. He fled Germany in 1933. With a heavy heart, he left the country he had once called home, knowing he might never return. He sailed across the Atlantic Ocean to the United States, where he accepted a position at the newly formed Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. It was the beginning of a new life. In America, Einstein was welcomed with open arms. Scientists and scholars were thrilled to have him. He walked through the quiet streets of Princeton like a regular man, despite being one of the most famous people in the world. He wore no socks. He didn't own a car. He would sail on the lake even though he didn't know how to swim. Fame never changed him. But even in this peaceful new home, Einstein's heart was heavy. He was devastated by what was happening in Germany. The violence, the persecution, the growing list of exiled scientists, silenced thinkers, and destroyed lives. Though safe in America, Einstein never stopped speaking out. He helped Jewish refugees escape Europe, raised funds, and used his voice to call attention to the growing danger. He believed that silence in the face of injustice was a betrayal of truth. In 1940, Einstein officially became a U.S. citizen, though he always kept his Swiss citizenship as well. He was grateful for the safety and freedom the United States offered, but he never stopped feeling like a citizen of the world. His work continued. He taught, he wrote, and he kept chasing the dream of unifying the forces of nature, a theory that could explain everything. But the peace did not last. World War II erupted, and soon the world would face a terrifying new reality: nuclear weapons. Einstein had long known that his famous equation, E=mc2, showed the immense power hidden in atoms. In 1939, concerned that Nazi Germany might be building an atomic bomb, he signed a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, urging the U.S. to explore nuclear research. This letter led to the creation of the Manhattan Project, the secret program that would develop the first atomic bombs. Einstein himself did not work on the bomb. He was not invited to join the project, partly due to his pacifist views and political activism. But when he learned about the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, he was heartbroken. Though he had only lit the match, he felt connected to the fire that followed. Mankind invented the atomic bomb, he said, but no mouse would ever construct a mousetrap. From that moment on, Einstein became a fierce advocate for nuclear disarmament. He spoke against war more passionately than ever before. He called for a world government, for cooperation between nations, and for an end to weapons of mass destruction. He had once changed how we understand the universe. Now, he was trying to save the world from destroying itself. Final years and legacy. In his later years, Albert Einstein lived a life of striking simplicity. Despite being one of the most recognized and celebrated figures in human history, he remained humble, a man more comfortable in old sweaters than in tuxedos, more interested in questions than applause. He refused to be treated like a celebrity. While reporters waited outside his home, he spent his time quietly working, playing the violin, and sailing on the lake, even though he never learned how to swim. At Princeton, he continued to dive deep into the mysteries of the universe. While other scientists celebrated the achievements of quantum mechanics, Einstein remained skeptical. He famously said, "God does not play dice with the universe," expressing his discomfort with the randomness at the heart of quantum theory. Instead, he dedicated the rest of his life to seeking something greater, a unified field theory. He wanted to bring together all the known forces of nature, gravity, electromagnetism, and more, into one elegant framework. It was a dream he never abandoned, though he never solved it. But science was not his only focus. Einstein spent his final decades as a voice of conscience in a world struggling with war, racism, and injustice. He supported the civil rights movement in the United States, speaking out against segregation and openly calling racism a disease of white people. He corresponded with W.E.B. Du Bois and supported Paul Robeson, showing his solidarity with those who fought for equality. He was also deeply involved in efforts to promote peace. After witnessing the horrors of World War II and the devastation of nuclear weapons, he became a tireless advocate for global cooperation. He helped found organizations dedicated to peace and scientific responsibility, and he spoke publicly about the dangers of nationalism and unchecked power. He warned that the survival of humanity depended not on weapons, but on wisdom. As the years passed, Einstein's health began to decline, but his mind remained as sharp and curious as ever. He continued writing letters, working on equations and welcoming visitors from around the world who sought his thoughts and blessings. He never stopped learning, never stopped wondering. On April 18, 1955, at the age of 76, Albert Einstein passed away from an abdominal aneurysm. True to form, he had written a final set of equations the night before. His last words, spoken in German, were lost to time. The American nurse at his side did not understand the language. And perhaps that was fitting, because Einstein's legacy was never in his final words. It was in his life's work, in his questions, and in the quiet courage that guided him from a curious child to a man who changed the world. Today, Albert. Einstein's name is almost synonymous with genius, but his story is not just about intelligence. It's about perseverance in the face of doubt, humility in the face of fame, and hope in the face of fear. He showed us that greatness isn't about knowing everything. It's about never giving up on the search for truth. His life reminds us struggles shape greatness. Einstein faced rejection, poverty, and ridicule, but he never stopped believing in his path. Curiosity drives progress. His endless questions led to answers that changed humanity's understanding of reality. Humility is powerful. Despite being praised as a genius, he never stopped being a student of life. Even now, his words continue to inspire. Try not to become a person of success, but rather try to become a person of value. And that perhaps is the most brilliant equation of all. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to like, share, and comment below. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating powerful, real-life stories that teach English and inspire the soul. Subscribe now so we can continue growing together. Here are 20 key vocabulary words and phrases that were repeated or strongly emphasized throughout the story of Albert Einstein, along with explanations in English to support learning. Curiosity, a strong desire to learn or know something. Einstein's lifelong curiosity drove him to explore the universe's deepest mysteries. Persistence, the quality of continuing to try, even when it's hard or when there are obstacles. Einstein kept going despite rejection, poverty, and failure. Rejection, being told no or being turned away. Einstein faced rejection from schools and employers, but he didn't give up. Theory, an explanation or idea based on study and reasoning, often used in science. Einstein developed several famous theories, including relativity. Relativity, a scientific theory developed by Einstein that shows how time and space change depending on speed and gravity. Genius, a person with exceptional intellectual or creative power. Einstein is widely considered a genius, but he believed curiosity mattered more than intelligence. Fame, being known by many people, often for achievements. Einstein became famous worldwide, but remained humble. Scientific paper, a written document that presents a scientist's ideas or discoveries. Einstein published many papers that changed physics forever. Invention, a new tool or device created through imagination and skill. Einstein worked at a patent office reviewing inventions. Pacifist, a person who believes in peace and refuses to support war. Einstein strongly opposed violence and war. Humble, not proud or arrogant, modest. Even after becoming famous, Einstein stayed humble and lived simply. Disarmament, the act of reducing or eliminating military weapons. Einstein advocated for nuclear disarmament after WW2's atomic bomb, a powerful weapon created using nuclear energy. Though Einstein's equation helped make it possible, He was deeply troubled by its use. Self-taught, learning without formal teaching or school. Einstein taught himself many subjects outside the classroom: criticism, negative feedback, or judgment. Einstein faced criticism from teachers, scientists, and political groups, but stayed true to his values. Imagination, the ability to form ideas or images in your mind. Einstein used imagination for scientific thought experiments, unseen. Forces, powers or influences that cannot be seen, like gravity or magnetism. The compass in childhood made Einstein curious about these forces: humanity, the quality of being kind and caring, or the human race as a whole. Einstein believed science should serve all of humanity. Discipline, the ability to control behavior. And focus on goals or a field of study. Some thought Einstein lacked discipline, but he was highly focused in his own way. Legacy, something left behind after someone's life, especially ideas or influence. Einstein's legacy continues to inspire science and peace.